everyone, good evening. You're watching News Epicenter with me, Marya, Shakil. India has recorded over 280,000 positive cases in the last 2 days. This certainly is a grim number because this is similar to how the trend has been over the last few days. The bigger worry, although, has been the fatalities, which were at a record high of 3,780 in the last 24 hours. The golden strategy to curb the spread of virus is testing, tracking, tracing, isolation, and home-based treatment. But with India's healthcare infrastructure put to test, the reality is not very encouraging. As of yesterday, India had a total of 2,506 molecular test laboratories where close to 15 lakh tests are conducted on a daily basis. But even with this kind of testing numbers, the laboratories are facing challenges to meet the expected targeted testing. To optimize India's testing strategy, the center has revised the testing rules to reduce pressure on diagnostic labs. Yesterday, the ICMR issued new guidelines and ruled out RT-PCR test for healthy interstate travelers. ICMR has also said that once a person has tested positive, there is no need for another test, and the recovered patients don't need RT-PCR at the time of discharge. Another big change in the testing strategy is more focus on antigen tests. The ICMR has advised setting up testing booths at multiple locations so that testing numbers can be ramped up. However, there are several questions that arises from these new guidelines prescribed by the ICMR, with a lot of cases being reported as asymptomatic. Avoiding RT-PCR for healthy individuals who are traveling might be taking a big chance. The push for antigen test will surely speed up the testing, but the accuracy of antigen test has always been under question. With the medical infrastructure under so much of duress, is it time to ignore these small things and focus on the big picture of getting more and more people tested? Or can the strategy actually backfire? To discuss this, on News Epicenter this evening, we have Dr. A. Velumani. He is the MD of Thyrocare. Dr. Ashok Seth is the chairman of Fortis Scott's Heart Institute. Dr. Raman Gangakhetkar is former chief epidemiologist of ICMR. And Dr. Polly Roy is the professor and chair of virology, London School of Hygienic and Tropical Medicine. Dr. Raman Gangakhetkar, I'm coming to you. Given the fact that the positivity rate at this point is so high, will the rapid antigen test really explain the extent of the spread of the virus? Why are we moving back to RAT when RT-PCR is seen as gold standard in terms of diagnostics?
See, one thing which we must keep in the mind is we know we have a huge testing capacity. We have expanded the lab network, but still it remains a finite capacity for conducting RT-PCR. One must also remember that if you are planning to get RT-PCR done, then your turnaround time is going to be close to be around 24 hours at its best. Now, given that, early detection becomes a very important thing in a setting where you want to reduce the number of transmissions that tend to occur. All of us must remember that the person who's symptomatic, he is more likely to transmit this virus 2 days before and 2 days after being symptomatic. The longer there will be a delay in getting the test report, you will find that the secondary transmissions would have had fairly taken place within the family or within his close contacts. Using rapid antigen test, perhaps you will have a better advantage of weeding out those who are symptomatic and ensuring that you add additional capacity to that would perhaps broaden your capacity to undertake large number of tests to be done. We also must understand that
But
diagnosing infections,
yes.
yeah, continue to remain a priority. And I think the guidelines should stay that is those who are symptomatic and negative perhaps should be tested by RT-PCR. If we are thinking in terms of detecting asymptomatic infections, it is going to be challenging. We don't have the genomic tests that we would perhaps require in order to do that, and that's going to add to the complications. We must also remember that large proportion of these transmissions now that you are seeing in areas where this transmission is increasing are occurring in the rural areas. Now access to such tests is going to become extremely challenging in those circumstances. To my mind, this is a balanced approach given the limitations that we have.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Ashok said, here is Dr. Raman Gangakhetkar saying that this is a balanced approach. But there have been multiple instances of false negative in an RT-PCR test. So, don't you think that a rapid antigen test comes in that space where it can create an impression of not really a spread of a virus which has actually spread so far and deep in the entire country?
So we must remember, and I
How
support.
reliable can it be?
Let me just say that I support exactly what Dr. Ganga said. This is a very sensible decision for this particular moment. Don't consider it as a medical science or a policy. ICMR is a wonderful think tank. It's supported sensibly throughout this fight for COVID. And absolutely at this time, the testing with the backlog that there is, that we are stretched in terms of getting an RT-PCR done and its results, which delays tracing, which delays treatment, and which delays contact tracing. The yield has to be where actually the situation lies. And we know that actually this is the group of symptomatic people as well as which is where the maximum yield lies. If this, by the way, you talk about antigen testing. If you do antigen testing when the yield is low and when the disease prevalence is low, it gets less sensitive. And it's also recognized that in the present circumstances, where really 30% of the tests are coming positive, that becomes a very valuable test because its yield will be high. It is known that sensitivity of every test depends upon the level of disease process in that community. Now, this is the real point of it all. Let us use these tests in a manner that if the delay happens, and it's in a symptomatic person or a person who required treatment or a person who could spread the infection, then we're doing the wrong thing. Look at travelers and asymptomatic people. While you and I may argue on the surveillance that we pick up asymptomatic individuals who could have otherwise spread, that is where you can test 1,000 people and the yield will come low. And yet, if you test 100 symptomatic people, the yield is high. Therefore, you prevent propagation of infection much better in the present circumstances of the situation of the tsunami of the pandemic that we are. So it is important to understand that wherever the yield is lowest is not where your best bang for the buck lies in the present circumstances. Get your test done, get the results faster, and be able to trace and treat and track people. That's the final logic about it.
Yes, Dr. said, given the fact that the entire health care infrastructure is so overburdened, even if the testing is happening, the reports are delayed by several days as well. So in that period, if a person is asymptomatic and has all the symptoms but without a report, that person may not get admission in hospital. There have been many cases like that as well. Dr. Polly Roy, help us understand in the context of how experiences of various countries have been with rapid antigen test. When there is this kind of burden over the laboratories, did they go back to rapid antigen test, moving away from RT-PCR?
I can barely hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead, ma'am.
So,
yes.
Rapid antigen test is essential for India right now because the RT-PCR test takes a long time and impossible to process that many people very fast. I think it's a very good decision to make that these antigen tests, even though we know that it is not perfect. But at least one thing for sure, that if you have a too much of virus load, you have the antigen, so you can test, you can get the test positive. But often virus is a lower load. People have low number of viruses, then they may not show the positive test. However, that will then increase later on. So for me, I think that of course RT-PCR is the best one, but is processing RT-PCR takes long time, and current situation in India, it has to be some other test going on very fast. So that decision is fine. But I think that when you are positive with the antigen test is fine, but when you're negative with that, because
No,
virus
but how do you look at it, the entire revision of ICMR guidelines, which also includes that if a patient is leaving a hospital, he need not even have a negative test. He can leave it if he appears to have recovered.
because to cut
Clinically,
down
of course.
the reason being it is to cut down the work. Currently, I think it is not possible to do all the things necessary properly. So at least you have to now have a little bit more selective. What can be done quickly and better way that at least most of the people who are coming down in infection that you can see it. A problem is the asymptomatic people. Asymptomatic people doesn't mean they have low virus load. Sometimes a high virus load also are asymptomatic, younger people particularly, and they may spread the virus very quickly. Even those are the people should have antigen tests really, because protein will be there, so they can test that quickly. It's only take 15 minutes to 30 minutes.
Okay.
RT-PCR will take several days and a lot of work. So I think that current situation is such that it has to be done this way. There is no other way currently. And after infection...
Okay, Dr. Velumani, the MD of Thyrocare is also on the show right now. Dr. Velumani, help us understand through your own experience, particularly in the context of the decision that has been taken by the ICMR, this shift of the testing strategy.
See, there are four points I wish to make. This virus is such a funny virus. All symptomatic need not be positive. All asymptomatic need not be negative. We have seen it for the last 400 days. So going by symptom is not anything wisdom. Number two, the same ICMR said in the beginning of the pandemic, without 2 consecutive negative, you cannot discharge a patient. Today, if you adopt that, I don't have time or resources, you go home without a confirmatory test, that is too rude on the patient. The next point is rapid antigen test detects only 2 to 3% of the patients when RT-PCR detects 15-20% of the patients. So what are you going to deal with that false negatives and keep infecting others? That's another point. The traveling might tell that you don't need a RT-PCR negative to go to the nearby state, but without with the virus sitting next to you as a patient for next 2 hours, are you going to travel? That is too rude again. So ICMR has to once again review and force laboratories to increase the capacity and use RT-PCR only as the route. Of course, you can use always a rapid antigen in a factory where there is no one truly is traveling out or cross-infecting somewhere else. So these are my points regarding ICMR's revision.
Yes, I'm going to come back to you. Dr. Raman Ganga-Khetkar, the point here, of course, that, the new mutant strain tends to almost go undiagnosed in several cases. So how effective would be a rapid antigen test? Because I'm looking at what the central government had said in a letter to various states in December. It had said clearly that the rapid antigen test should be around 30 to 40% and ensure that it does not take precedence over RT-PCR tests. And this was, of course, a letter that was issued by Balram Bhargav to all the states. RAT should be used for diagnosis of pre-symptomatic or early symptomatic individuals where the viral load is expected to be high. But the use of rapid antigen test should be restricted to 30 to 40% or less in the states.
No, I think one has to understand one thing. everybody wants the most utopian kind of thing, but given the circumstances where we are, we need to understand that we need to have a balanced approach for a larger good rather than every individual's good. That is something which is not possible at this point in time when the second wave is very, very strong. Second thing which I would say, on one hand, if you are criticizing that ICMR, earlier had issued such a guideline, then these guidelines are issued in a different context at that juncture when the infections were declining and the need that you do a stronger effort to go for contact tracing was pretty high. It is something which is different here. And I think as the evidences emerge, we will have to keep on changing. There is no other way that we can think of. And these changes are vital. I do not agree completely with the respect of testing individuals for interstate travel. No, basically, one has to understand one thing, that at a time when you are not able to offer tests to those who need, you are going to offer a test to somebody who is going to travel from one place to another. Perhaps that is, then I am allocating my resources in a different manner. I think more than spreading thin, what is required currently is, in the second
Okay,
wave,
so
the
you're
damage is to
essentially saying that this is
customer.
about judicious use of resources. But Dr. Raman Ganga Khetkar, what if the rapid antigen test doesn't give the right picture? What if it is about false negative more?
We say that, if you actually look at where the picture would differ, the picture may differ in terms of assessing what is the number of those individuals who are actually infected. If you actually look at RT-PCR, I don't exactly know now what is the entire capacity, but I don't think we have gone beyond 18 lakh per day. Now, which essentially means we are reaching a peak. It could perhaps go to 20 lakhs or whatever. But what will eventually happen? Your test positivity rates, they will keep on shooting, which perhaps will tell you that there is a
Yes.
need, that we need to detect more by offering different tests. And this attempt is extremely vital.
Okay.
I think, no, everybody wants the best thing to happen, but we have to understand our circumstances
Okay.
are not so.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Seth, to be, you wanted that exact number. It is 15.41 lakh tests in the last 24 hours. Dr. Raman Ganga Khetkar, the test positivity rate stands at 24.8%. And overall number of tests, that is 15.41, it's 1.2 lakh lower than the previous day. So, as far as testing is concerned, there are reports suggesting that several states may not be presenting the right picture. Dr. Seth, yes, there is a resource constraint. Everything is overburdened, overstretched. So perhaps moving to rapid antigen test may be the right thing. And there is a revision in the ICMR strategy, reflecting that. But again, my question that I'm continuing to ask is, what if I do not know the right picture? What if this revision in the strategy doesn't really explain the extent of the spread of the virus?
So let me just tell you that in an ideal world with unlimited resources for 1.3 billion people, we put down an ideal policy. But we're neither an ideal world, and in the present circumstances, everything is overstretched. So let's just accept that this, what has been said today, is the policy for this week, next week, week after, but maybe different 4 weeks later. That's the way to strategize for a country. You can't stick to a policy of last year when the virus is like a tsunami at the moment. And by the way, you also, before I get to your answer your specific question, I also want to address the fact that when you stated that beyond 14 days at the time of discharge, it's now being said there's no reason for testing. Absolutely, that is where you actually have the least pickup of anything with the greatest amount of confusion. So United States, UK, all have actually clearly banned, in fact, I wouldn't say banned, but do not recommend testing at the time of discharge. They just say if you're 10 days and the 3 days of being asymptomatic or 3 days without fever, go out, stay there for 7 days, and you're then in the community. And the reason is well understood. The fact is that even if you pick up a virus and the test comes, RT-PCR comes positive at 14th to 17th or 21st day, the implication of that is usually that it's a dead virus and there's no implication of that for going out in the community. So I think it's been well thought out for the present circumstances. You and me may say, oh, I think if somebody's going to come to my house, it better be tested. But actually, that's the way the world is actually going right now, very clearly. Now, you came to that point about how do we know about the spread of the virus? There is no 100% surety that you will catch everyone in a 1.3 billion population. So let's understand that. So you say, what is the strategy where we can catch most of the people, whether asymptomatic, whether symptomatic, earliest possible? And you tell me, if an RT-PCR, my gentleman from Ferocare said that we should mandate a greater degree of RT-PCR. Obviously, that's the ideal world. In the next 3 months, we perhaps will have more. But I'm talking about today. You're talking about today. You're saying, how do we actually do that today? And how do we do that tomorrow? And that's not just by increasing RT-PCR multiple times. By the way, he may be able to do it in a week's time. Most labs cannot do it in a week's time. We know, and at our labs, we had a backlog at one stage of 5 days of reporting for an RT-PCR test. That's been best overcome to perhaps a day to 36 hours. Now you can imagine that a patient has fever, he doesn't know, we don't know whether we should actually isolate him. Yes, okay, we tell him you get isolated because you most likely have it, but then there are his contacts. How many contacts do we trace? Do we quarantine them? Do we don't quarantine them? And if he's getting worse, do we know he's got a chest infection?
I get your point. So it's not an ideal world where, where there are unlimited resources, unlimited time. Time is of essence here. Dr. Velumani, I'll give you the final words. The point being made by Dr. Raman Ganga Khetkar and Dr. Said and also Dr. Polly here is that these are difficult times. And because it's the second wave which has completely overwhelmed just all of us and the medical community, this is the only option. And the the overburdened system that you're working in and the backlogs that you have in various laboratories, this is the only solution.
Let me tell you, what is easy to do is not right to do, and what is right to do is not easy to do. Our laboratory is today used only 50% capacity. We have got 40,000 tests possible every day. We are only getting 20,000 a day. Let me remind you, March 2020, we had a capacity to process only 2,500 a day. Today, we have got a capacity to process 25 lakhs a day. Within 1 year, from 2,500, we have come to 25 lakhs. We have to add one more zero. It would take only 8 more weeks. It is possible. Please don't settle with a rapid antigen test, which is having a very, very poor reliability and completely defeat the purpose of testing. Then you declare that there is no need for testing. Absolutely all right.
But when you are racing against time, and if the reports do not come in 5 days or 6 days time, then what do you do?
I am telling you, the country has enough capacity, but they are unfortunately lopsidedly distributed like oxygen capacities. All government agencies, state, central should coordinate so that all capacities are fully utilized. Meanwhile, keep creating more capabilities. Without RT-PCR, you can't manage your COVID management.
Okay, thank you so much for your thoughts, Dr. Velumani, Dr. Ashok Seth, Dr. Raman Ganga Khetkar, and Dr. Polly Roy. Of course, the ICMR has revised the guidelines. There are several easing of restrictions that have happened as well, change in testing strategy clearly. Is this in the best interest, given the changing times and how the medical infrastructure is overburdened? Perhaps, as you heard from the experts on the show, they say, yes, it must be. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you tomorrow.